Indiana coach Curt Cignetti talked a big game all season long, all the way up until the moment that Notre Dame kicked off against the Hoosiers. But in the end, Marcus Freeman and the Irish made Cignetti and the Hoosiers crumble under pressure in the biggest game of the year. This is Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I'm thrilled to have you here on this Monday, December 23rd, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. Quick reminder to hit that subscribe button if you're watching along on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, if you're watching on YouTube today, you'll recognize that I'm in a little different place than normal. I am actually in my girlfriend's childhood bedroom. This is definitely one of the more random places that I've had to do a pod, and technically I am on vacation with my day job, but look, it's the college football playoff. Notre Dame football is still playing, and we just got some big news today that one of Notre Dame's best players, Rylie Mills, is going to be out for the remainder of the college football playoff. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to make sure I get an episode up today. Obviously, with it being the holidays, this goes to Christmas. My schedule is going to be way different than normal, but I really wanted to get a show up today because there's so much to talk about still. Saturday, right after Notre Dame beat Indiana, me and Luke Smith got together. We did an in-person reaction show that morning, but I have some final thoughts about the game and really the first weekend of the college football playoff because I know it wasn't the most entertaining first round of the college football playoff, but I hope you enjoyed watching all the games over the weekend. Personally, I had a blast watching the action unfold while I was still riding the high from Notre Dame's win over Indiana on Friday night, and we're going to break it all down on today's show. I have some thoughts on the discourse that's going on about the playoff, who should be in and who shouldn't, but to me, it was just a familiar result in a new format, but we're going to save that for the end, because I want to share some of my final thoughts on Notre Dame's win over Indiana and also some thoughts on the Rylie Mills injury news before we turn the page to Georgia, because after rewatching that game on the plane, I was taking a bunch of notes, and I just feel like Notre Dame actually didn't play that great, but they were still able to dominate Indiana, and I just think that's actually a really positive sign for what Notre Dame can do against Georgia, because if they clean that stuff up, they're going to be in much better shape going up against the Bulldogs. But I actually want to start by talking about the coaching matchup between Marcus Freeman and Curt Cignetti, because outside of the obvious talent disparity between the two programs, I thought that Marcus Freeman and his staff put on an absolute clinic going up against Curt Cignetti. Like I said, they clearly had more talent, but the coaching staff had to get that talent ready to go and showcase itself going against a quality opponent, and they were able to do that. When you play a game on the biggest stage, sometimes nerves get the better of you, and all of that talent doesn't come out. And a team like Indiana, who might not have as much talent, they've been so well coached all year that maybe they can play to their full potential and keep that game close. But Marcus Freeman was able to eliminate pretty much any doubt because he won the headset matchup going away. This team was ready to go from the moment that game started. Even though they had that interception on the first play, they were able to bounce back immediately with the Xavier Watts interception. And Marcus Freeman has proven himself to be a great big game coach. Let's think back to his first ever game as first regular season game as the head coach for Notre Dame. 2022, Notre Dame was on the road against Ohio State, huge matchup, top five. Even though Notre Dame ended up not finishing a top five team that year, there was still a huge game. And even though Notre Dame lost that game, they were ready to play. They came out ready to go. They had a lead in the third quarter. Like, it wasn't due to talent. Like that, in that game, Notre Dame did not have as much talent as Ohio State. That's why they lost. This was a different story. Then Notre Dame was able to knock off a top five team in Clemson at the end of the year. One of the last home games of the year. Great first big win of the Marcus Freeman era. Then you think about Ohio State in 2023. Another huge game. Notre Dame obviously fell short, and they had the 10-man gaff there at the end. But again, they came out ready to go. The team was clicking, and even though they didn't win, they went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the entire country. Then we get to 2024. Notre Dame wins season opener on the road against Texas A&M. Huge spot there. They win that game. And then in the next biggest game of the year, they were able to knock off Indiana at home. So he's shown already that he's a great big game coach, but he's also improved so much with his in-game strategy. That's been one of my biggest critiques of him, really, since the moment he took over as head coach. I felt like there was often times you're like, wait, what are they doing? Why are they using that timeout? I didn't understand some of the decisions he made in game, but I think that he has improved so much in that respect. Honestly, starting with this season, like he forced Indiana to take a timeout before the fake field goal attempt. They lined up in the field goal, then they motioned out wide. Indiana was very confused, and then they burned a timeout right before Notre Dame actually got the snap off. And it's a good thing that Indiana burned that timeout because Notre Dame did not convert on that fourth down play. And then after Indiana called the timeout, you could literally see Marcus Freeman looking over at the Indiana sideline, just smiling like, I got you. And maybe that's the reason why him and Cignetti had like an awkward handshake in the postgame. I don't really read too much into that. It looks like Marcus Freeman just said, good game. Cignetti came up to him and might have had a couple extra words, but I don't read too much into that, honestly. But I just thought that was such a great moment when he literally baited Indiana and taking that timeout. And that was a big moment. Notre Dame was up 17-3 at the time, and Curt Cignetti already had lost one timeout, so then he had to use another one, and now it's like Notre Dame has a big lead, and Indiana's going to need those timeouts late in this game if they're going to try to come back, but they had to burn one there. That was a key one. I also thought it was a great call to run that reverse on the kickoff return at the start of the second half because wind was a factor in this game. Neither kicker was really able to generate much touchbacks. Notre Dame at least tried to return them. Indiana refused. They were just content with taking a fair catch every single time, which I did not understand. We'll get to the Cignetti conservative play calling here in a second, but to run that play right there was so great because then Jordan Faison just had to beat one guy. He did, and he was one shoestring tackle away from breaking that off for a touchdown. Notre Dame had probably been saving that. They have not run a reverse like that since they gave the ball to Jeremiah Love much earlier on in the season, but I thought it was a great time to break it out and almost led to a touchdown. He's aggressive when he needs to be, but he was also willing to take the points when they were there. Even though Notre Dame left some points on the board, I felt like they were smart when they took their field goals, and good for Mitch Jeter for getting a couple there through the uprights. Also, Al Golden, defensive coordinator, had an answer for everything that Indiana offensive coordinator Mike Shanahan was trying to do in this matchup. Curtis Rourke, the Indiana quarterback, has been incredibly efficient all year long. He is so good at making decisions post-snap and taking what the defense gives you. But Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, the entire defense was so in line, and they made life really hell for Rourke all night long because he just wasn't seeing the field very clearly. And then when Al Golden stopped dialing up some exotic pressures and different looks like that at the end, that's the first time that Indiana had any success. And if you want to point to those last couple drives and think, oh, should Notre Dame be concerned? Well, I can tell you one person who's not concerned. That's Al Golden, because when he was asked about it in the postgame, he said, yeah, wasn't concerned, did not want to show them any exotic pressures or put anything new on tape. We had the game in control. Normally, you'd get a coach who's like, yeah, we got to cut all that out. We didn't play to standard and all that stuff. But Al Golden was like, no, I just basically called a very vanilla defense, and they scored it, but the game was already in hand, so it didn't really matter. Indiana could not get the run game going at all. They finished with less than 100 rushing yards in that game. They really tried to force it at different points in the end. So I thought it was just a masterful display by the defense. And outside of the interception at the start, I thought Mike Denbrock called a very good game. The offense was incredibly efficient. They had very few empty possessions other than the one I just mentioned. I thought that 16-play drive was an absolute masterpiece. It took 9 minutes off the game clock, 17 minutes of live action. And I can tell you, being there, how cold that was. If that for that Indiana offense to have to sit there for 17 minutes straight, just getting more and more cold, that definitely affected them in the later drives. And I thought one thing that was so beneficial for Notre Dame's offense in this game is they put themselves in good position on first down. They had very few negative plays. They had over 126 yards on first down just in the first quarter. Now, granted, 98 of those came on the Jeremiah Love touchdown run, but still, they continued to gain ground on the first down play. That set them up for favorable third down conversions, and they finished 7 of 13 on third down. So all in all, I find it absolutely hilarious that Curt Cignetti did all that talking, but in the two biggest games of the season, he was outcoached and played not to get blown out. Like, it almost felt like he was worried about building his resume to make the college football playoff while he was in a playoff game. Like in that Ohio State game, Indiana was down 31-7. They had the ball in the second half. They had this long scoring drive where they're running the ball, taking a bunch of time off the clock. So then they ended up losing 38-15 because of some window dressing late. And you could very clearly tell what they were trying to do in that moment. Well, that's kind of what it felt like they were doing in this game. Like, it wasn't just the fact that they punted down 17 in the fourth quarter when they were in pretty decent field position. They also didn't burn a timeout earlier than that. So he was very, very conservative all game long, and I respect for what he's done this year at IU for turning that program around. But then to go on College Game Day 2 hours before the kickoff saying that you beat the crap out of every ranked team you play and then call the softest game ever, like, he doesn't back up what he talks. But meanwhile, Marcus Freeman, who didn't do any talking in the lead up, came out the aggressor. He had his team all ready to go, and he let the game do the talking. So I think that was a loud message to Indiana and the rest of the football world that Notre Dame is a damn good football team. They might not do a ton of talking off the field, but on the field, they let their play do the talking. All right, even though this was a great win for the Irish, they did lose one of their best players for the remainder of the playoffs. Will the loss of Rylie Mills be the difference in the game against Georgia? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, tell me if you've heard this one before. One of Notre Dame's best players on the defensive side of the ball is out for the remainder of the 2024 season with an injury. Unfortunately, Notre Dame's star defensive tackle and captain Rylie Mills is the next star player out for this season. Marcus Freeman made the announcement on Monday that Rylie Mills is going to be out for the remainder of the college football playoffs, and there is no way to spin this. This is a really tough blow for the Notre Dame defense and the Notre Dame team at large, because Mills is a captain. He's one of the unquestioned leaders of this team, and he has a presence not just when he's on the field, but off the field as well, and it's obviously going to be harder for him and that leadership to shine through when he's not actually playing. I would say the only thing that's surprising about this is the fact that the news came out just a couple of days after the game, because when the game ended, Marcus Freeman went on SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt and told him that he got news that it wasn't a season-ending injury, and they were hoping to get him ready in the next 10 to 11 days. But obviously, he underwent some further testing, and he is going to be out for the remainder of the playoffs. And it is a very, very tough pill to swallow. Now, Gabriel Rubio is going to have to step in and play a bigger role than he probably ever has in his career. Howard Cross is probably not going to be able to come off the field nearly as much. They're not going to be able to rotate as much without a guy like Rylie Mills going up against a very physical front on Georgia. And obviously, this is just a really tough break for the Notre Dame defense, but I also just feel so bad for Rylie Mills, because this is a terrible way for his college career to end. He comes back for one more year to be a captain, to be a leader, and to play in the college football playoffs. They make it to the playoffs. His first half against Indiana was some of the best play I've ever seen from Rylie Mills in his career. He was just a dominant force up the middle. And even on the play that he got hurt, the reason he got hurt is because he just completely dominated. His blocker was in the backfield. Him and Bryce Young were right there. Bryce Young got the sack, and it looks like they just collided knees there. So the fact that he was playing so well and then his season is cut short like this is just incredibly disappointing. And we could talk about the impact that it has on this Notre Dame team, but I just genuinely feel awful for these guys in these moments, because they work so hard to get to this point. And then for it to all just taken away like that is just, it's devastating. So I feel for Rylie Mills. And, will it be the backbreaker? It's hard to say, right? Because this is just another great player in the Notre Dame defense. They lost Benjamin Morrison, they lost Boubacar Traore, they lost Jordan Botelho, and now Rylie Mills. And that's just on the defense. Jason Onye also on the defense. He stepped aside. He's obviously not going to be back on the team for the rest of the year. We know about the injuries on the offensive line too. So it is just a really tough break for this Notre Dame defensive line. And they have been able to get by for the most part, even despite the fact that they lost Howard Cross for a couple games in there as well. They have been able to just rotate guys in and figure it out. But obviously it's a little bit different when you're trying to rotate guys in going up against Notre Dame's regular season schedule compared to Georgia, who has been by far the best program in college football in recent years. So now when I look at that matchup between Notre Dame's defensive line and Georgia's offensive line, I felt like maybe going into this game, if you have Rylie Mills and Howard Cross, but everyone's all healthy, I think Notre Dame had a slight advantage in that matchup going up against Georgia's offensive front, because they have dealt with some injuries so far this year. But I will say that Georgia offensive line has been playing probably their best football all season over the last month of the year. Now, I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you got to be hoping for like a draw at best there. And even then, that might be tough to achieve because Mills is just that good. And now, Notre Dame is basically going to have to make up for Mills' loss in every other phase of the game. The rest of the defense are going to have to get even more exotic. Al Golden is going to have to be even more creative, drawing up pressures. The good thing is we got some somewhat better, not better news, but some positive news on the injury front. Kingsley Viliamu-Asa is going to be back at practice. I don't know if he's going to be able to play or how much of a factor he's going to be, but it's going to take all hands on deck for Notre Dame to be able to beat Georgia. Al Golden is a mastermind. We've already talked about that, so he's going to have even more pressure on him to figure out a way for Notre Dame to stop Georgia's running game and also get pressure on Gunnar Stockton, because for as much of a bummer as this is, Georgia is also without their starting quarterback in this game, so injuries are happening across football. When you play a 16 to 17 game schedule now, you're going to see more injuries. You got to play more games. More guys are going to go down. This is just the reality of college football. And also, when you have so many guys transferring around and stuff, like it's going to hurt depth. And I think in the future, once this new walk-on rule comes into effect, there's going to be even more issues because teams are not going to have as many guys on the roster, which is going to affect how practice works. But that's getting a little bit too far ahead. I just think that Notre Dame is going to have to play better and every other phase to make up for this. So let's talk about what they can improve from the Indiana game to make sure that they can make up for Mills' loss. I think the offense left a little bit too many points on the board. They had 3 drives stalled that resulted in field goal attempts. Now, the one right before the half that happens, they didn't have that much time, but then they had 2 other drives where they were driving the ball down the field, and then they just came up short. Against Georgia, that's not going to happen because they probably aren't going to have as many positive drives. So whenever they get in the red zone or close to the red zone, they absolutely have to get 6 points on the board there. And I understand that Indiana has a good rush defense, statistically one of the best rush defenses in the country. They held Notre Dame's running game in check for the most part. Jeremiah Love had that 98-yard touchdown run, but other than that, they weren't really getting anything going on the ground. Like Jadarian Price didn't really have his breakoff run. He had 11 carries for 32 yards. Love was held in check the remainder of the game, but he did have that one great play where he stiff-armed that defender into like the core of the earth there. So they're going to have to figure some things out. I think the offensive line was still kind of getting things figured out. They lost Rocco Spindler, the right guard in that game. Sam Pendleton came in. I think Rocco Spindler is probably going to be able to go. It looked like a concussion. He was in street clothes for the end of that game, but not totally sure. Either way, the offensive line is going to have to step up because Georgia's defensive line is one of, if not the best in the entire country. And I just feel like Mitchell Evans is going to have to be a factor. Like, he was absent in terms of production for the majority of that game against Indiana, and then when the one play where he did have a catch, he immediately fumbled it. Fortunately, Jordan Faison was right there, but you expect a little bit more from a guy who's been around and who is as talented as Mitchell Evans. So on offense, they got to capitalize on those opportunities when they get the ball on the other side of the field. They got to get Mitchell Evans more involved. He's one of their best players, so he's got to play a little bit better, and that offensive line is going to have to step up to the challenge going up against Georgia because Notre Dame is going to have to be able to run the ball a little bit more. I'd like to see a little bit more from Bo Collins as well. He had a nice catch on third down, but that drop was unacceptable. I think his effort is becoming an issue as well. He made a business decision on that first onside attempt, so a lot of guys need to step up on the offense. Even though they still played a good game against Indiana, they're going to have to play much, much better against Georgia because the step up in competition is just that significant. And as a whole, I mean, outside of Rylie Mills, this team just needs to get healthy. Like Jeremiah Love, he's been dealing with the flu. He's got the knee injury. I hope that over the course of the next 10 days, he's going to get back closer to full health. That's going to be very important. I mentioned Rocco Spindler. Hopefully he's able to go. Bryce Young, I believe, is going to be able to play. He was running around after the game. I think it was just a stinger. So these guys, everyone else is just going to have to step up a little bit more because losing Rylie Mills is a big, big blow. And it's just so disappointing for him and this team that has already dealt with so much on the injury front. But look, it's the college football playoffs. Injuries are going to happen to everyone. You can't really make excuses at this point. Like, you are in this position. You have a great chance going up against Georgia without your starting quarterback. You cannot let this one injury be the thing that lets the season finally crater all at that point. They have shown incredible resiliency all season long, and I have no reason to expect anything different going up against the Bulldogs. All right, Notre Dame's win over Indiana was one of 4 blowouts in the first round of the college football playoff, but history tells us we should have seen this coming all along. That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Personally, I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It is thrilling. But not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Well, it's a new format, but pretty much the same results for the first round of the college football playoff. We saw 4 blowouts, but I don't really understand why anyone is too surprised by all of this, because the spread in every single one of those games was at least a touchdown. And I think most people looked at the matchups and thought, like, okay, like Notre Dame is significantly more talented than Indiana. Penn State is much more talented than SMU. Texas and Clemson on a talent level, they're probably a little bit closer, but like Clemson has not been nearly as good this season, and Texas has looked like a really good team at different points this season. I think the one thing that caught everyone by surprise was how much Ohio State thoroughly dominated Tennessee, but it is kind of funny how it all worked out, right? Because after Notre Dame beat Indiana, everyone was like, oh, Indiana didn't even deserve to be in there. Kirk Herbstreit said they were outclassed and all that stuff. And then for SMU to just get destroyed by Penn State like that in the first game of the day didn't really help those discussions about the SEC. You got Lane Kiffin on Twitter crying for not being in the college football playoff. He's whining the college football playoff committee. But all of a sudden, all that talk from all the SEC people, they got real quiet when Ohio State was just putting it on Tennessee at night, because it doesn't fit the narrative. And personally, that has been the most disappointing thing to me about the first round of the college football playoff. It's not that those games weren't entertaining. I won't lie to you. They weren't the most entertaining games, but like that happens in all sports. Like sometimes the first round series aren't great. So even though I was a little bit disappointed that they weren't as entertaining as I was hoping they'd be, I was way more disappointed in the discourse and the discussion about the college football playoff after the first weekend. Like people didn't waste a second to just say that Indiana didn't deserve to be in there. And look, maybe they weren't one of the 12 best teams in the college football playoff, but like, yeah, it's easy to say that with the benefit of hindsight after watching Notre Dame just control them for the entire game. Like, I actually thought Indiana, even though they weren't nearly as good as Notre Dame, like, they have a pretty good defense. Notre Dame wasn't just moving the ball at will on offense, and they played well against Ohio State as well on defense. And yeah, like, their offense, it wasn't able to do anything, but like Notre Dame and Ohio State have 2 of the best defenses in the entire country. So like, I just think that people were way too quick to dismiss them and say they didn't belong, and then to then go and say that, oh, these 3 lost teams absolutely deserve to be in, like an Alabama who got beat by a 6-6 Oklahoma team late in the year, and Ole Miss who lost to Florida. Like, everyone is just trying to push their own agenda, and it took all of the attention away from all the great stuff that happened during the first round of the college football playoff. Like, look, I can just tell you right now, I have been very fortunate to go to a bunch of Notre Dame games in my life, and that's never lost on me, because like when I was a kid growing up, we would get to go to like one Notre Dame game a year, and that was the best day of the year for me every single year, and it was such a treat. And then when I was a student there, obviously you get season tickets and all that stuff, so I've been to a bunch of Notre Dame games in my life. That game on Friday night, I think that was the most fun I've ever had, going to a Notre Dame game. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels that way. That was such a special experience to have a home college football playoff game. So I feel like Notre Dame fans all feel that way. I bet Penn State fans absolutely love that experience. Ohio State, everyone who's able to host a playoff game, like that was an incredible scene for all of the schools involved. And I think we should be celebrating that, even though the games itself weren't that competitive. I think that there was so much special stuff going on in college football, but instead of appreciating that and recognizing that there's a lot of good stuff happening with this new format, everyone just started fighting each other about the SEC and who belonged to be in. And I just got so annoyed with all of that. Like, you've got some people who are big time figures in the sport, and they just sound bitter and just grumpy. And I don't get it. Like, why are you so miserable talking about the sport that you're supposed to love and be like one of the main talking heads and all that? Like, I just don't get it to me. And I felt like the mood in South Bend on Friday night was so great. And I understand if you're an Indiana fan, it's not as good. Or if you're just a casual college football fan, like, it wasn't the most fun game to watch. But that scene came through on TV, and there was a lot of great stuff from that game and all the other games that happened this weekend. So for the fact that instead of talking about that and appreciating it, we're just like fighting with different people online and just saying like these teams didn't even deserve to be on the field. Like what are you doing? Right? So I don't really get it, and I don't like talking about things and saying that this is a problem without presenting solutions, but like I don't really know what the solution here is, because people like to say, oh, college football needs a commissioner. And while I agree with that point that a commissioner would do some good things for college football, like why would anyone think that we're all just going to agree on one singular person to lead this sport? Because if the person has any SEC ties, then everyone's going to be like, oh, it's just going to be an SEC homer, all of that stuff. And if it's not from the SEC, then all the SEC people are like, they don't get it. The best conference is not going to be well represented. They don't get it. We're playing on a different level than everyone else. It's just never going to end. And I don't really know if there's a fix to it, because like, I think whoever is on their side that they agree with, they're just going to defend that side and say the other side is wrong. Like ESPN people are probably going to defend the SEC. Fox people are probably going to defend the Big Ten. Fans are going to defend their teams. And apparently if you're a fan in the SEC, you also have to support your conference as well, which I find very odd. Like Lane Kiffin tweeting out, let's go Vols before a playoff game. Like I know they're not like particularly rivals in the SEC, but if that happened in another conference, like, can you imagine Ryan Day saying, let's go Nittany Lions? Like, that would just never, ever happen. So anyway, it's all very weird. And I just don't think that there's going to be a fix here anytime soon, because no one is able to agree on anything. Like for years, they were like, the BCS isn't good enough. We need a 4-team college football playoff. Then they get to 4-team college football playoff. There's blowouts in the first round. They're like, this isn't good enough. We need a 12-team playoff. These games are boring. Well, now we get the 12-team playoff, and after the first round, everyone is still whining and complaining. It's never going to end. We don't need more teams. There are not 12 teams every year who are capable of winning the national championship. That was never what this was about. It was about getting more games, because then there's more games on TV and there's more money for everyone involved, and people who weren't really a part of the national championship hunt before, now they think they are because it's a 12-team format. But as we saw this weekend, 12 teams are not capable of winning the college football playoffs. So this is just the way college football is. This is the way that it has been, and I'm afraid that it's not going to get better anytime soon. And I think a lot of that is because people are so focused on the wrong things. Like if you love this sport, if you love college football, there was a lot of really great stuff to take in from this game, from the games this weekend. And I feel like no one is really talking about it. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because it's become almost like politics now, where you just have to defend your side so strongly. Like no one is ever going to be like on the SEC side. When are you ever going to see someone like watch an ACC team be like, you know what, those guys actually are good. They're going to compete with us. It's never really going to happen. And I just really, I keep saying it. It's really, really disappointing. And I understand that the games weren't that entertaining, and it's probably not the best television product, but you look across all sports, there's blowouts in the NFL playoffs in the first round all the time. And there's just no perfect way to do this. There's going to be some subjective arguments going on, because nobody's playing in a real like even playing field, especially now with the mega conferences and how imbalanced these schedules are. It's only going to get worse, because you're going to have more teams who got by with an easy schedule, and then they're going to be going up against teams who had like a really brutal schedule, and it's going to be really hard to make any definitive arguments that aren't going to have some flaws in them. Because like, think of it this way. All right, we can all agree that Notre Dame had a pretty weak schedule this year, right? Texas had a very weak schedule this year. Neither team, Texas or Notre Dame, really had that many great wins during the regular season. But anyone who could watch those teams, see the talent, see the way that they were beating teams, you could recognize like, okay, Notre Dame and Texas are probably one of the best teams in college football. Both of them showed that this weekend. Then you have teams like Indiana and SMU, who beat a bunch of teams this season. They won by a lot of points, a lot of games, specifically Indiana, a little less so with SMU, but they aren't historic programs. You look at the talent on the roster, it's not the same, but it's like, are you really going to penalize them? Like, do they really not deserve to be in there? Because they, like, Indiana lost one game and they were hammering every other opponent, but there was a lot of skepticism about, are they one of the 12 best teams? Well, they certainly didn't look like that in the college football playoff. And I'm just presenting the fact that there's basically, you can make the same argument about Notre Dame in Texas as those, if you really want to just focus on like strength of schedule, strength of record, all that stuff. But clearly there has to be some sort of eye test involved because Notre Dame and Texas looked better. They have more talent, and then they showcased that this weekend. And I only say that to say there's really never going to be a perfect argument made for any of these teams, because then you have like Georgia, who lost a couple games this year, but they also had some great wins too. So it's just going to go around and around and around, and there's really no perfect way to do it. And it's funny because now you got guys posting stuff on Twitter, like some of the arguments that like Kirk Herbstreit was making about wins and how the amount of wins shouldn't matter as much as who you beat and all that stuff. Well, basically him and other people at ESPN were making the exact opposite argument in 2017, the 14 playoff, when talking about Alabama and Ohio State. And I don't even say this to like pick on Kirk because he's taken a lot of heat over the past couple of days. It's really just everyone in college football. I think shockingly enough, Danny Cannell from CBS Sports, who says a lot of crazy things, was pretty right on when he said that you can't really script close games no matter how hard you try it. So I don't want people to just, their only takeaway from this first weekend of college football games to be like, oh, well, we need to change everything. We need to blow it up. Like, this is what you wanted. You wanted a 12-team format, and we're just going to blow it up after one weekend. Like, that doesn't really make any sense to me. And it really started with Notre Dame and their win over Indiana. I do think that that game against Georgia is going to be amazing, and I think that it has a chance to be one of the best games in the entire college football playoff. So hopefully, the other games in the second round can be close, and the focus can be on the games themselves, the teams, and all the great stuff about college football compared to just the constant bickering, because it is exhausting, and I hate that it's taking away from the game that we love. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. So with Christmas being just a couple days away, the schedule is going to be a little bit different this week. Like I said, I'm technically on vacation right now, clearly not home, but I'm not going to just stop posting the week before one of the biggest football games of my entire lifetime. So here's my plan. I'm going to tape the next episode the day after Christmas, and I'm going to get that up in the afternoon. Then I'm going to tape another episode on Friday. It's going to come out that day. Then I'm going to have to get at least one episode up on the 30th or the 31st before the game. At that point, I'm going to be in Florida with my family. We got our Christmas stuff. So I'm going to be traveling all over the country this week, and I'm going to try to make sure I get some episodes up in the lead up to the Georgia game, because this is going to be such a fun game, and I can't wait to talk about it. So make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, so that way you'll get a notification every time a new episode gets released. Also, follow the show on X at Locked On Irish. I'll provide more updates there as well. But this is my last episode before Christmas, so Merry Christmas to you and yours. I hope you have a great holidays, safe, sound, and relaxing. Enjoy it. Enjoy your time with your family, and I'll see you soon.